do know that cost of living inflation is one of voters' top three concerns, has been for a while, along with the economy more broadly. So some immediate action on that might be enough to give him a further initial boost.
I used to think that the day would never come. I'd see the light in the shade of the morning sun.
I used to think that the day would never come. That was the music, New Order and True Faith, that Andy Burnham chose to walk out to yesterday as he became Labour leader. But now the day has come. How easy will it be for him to win and retain the true faith of the British electorate? Let's speak now to Timothy Oliver, lecturer in British politics at the University of Manchester. Good morning, Timothy.
Good morning.
I think we can probably say of Andy Burnham that he longed for this day to come.
He's certainly been trying to get this day for a long time. You know, he first ran to be Labour leader 16 years ago. And so Andy Burnham's leadership ambitions are almost old enough to vote.
Yes, OK. And now there must be this. I mean, I think it'd be good to have your analysis on this, Timothy. I think he thought he was going to have a little bit more time when the opportunity finally came, because, first of all, Keir Starmer didn't put up a fight as maybe he could have done and said he was going to. And there hasn't been a leadership challenge, which would have delayed this moment where he actually walked through the doors of number 10, which means he hasn't had as much time as he would have liked to prepare.
Yes, there was some talk that the acronym that his supporters were using was ABC, Andy by Conference, and this idea that he'd be in place in September. So this is much more truncated than I think some people thought it was going to be. But almost as soon as he won the Makerfield by-election, the momentum started to build behind him very quickly among Labour MPs, who seem to have looked at the other alternatives available to them, the other names in the mix, and gone, we don't think you're the right person for this moment. It's got to be Andy Burnham.
Does the speed of this make things more tricky for him? I wonder how much name recognition or also just facial recognition he has across the entirety of the country.
I mean, looking at the polling, Andy Burnham's got pretty high name recognition for a politician, certainly for someone who's not been a national politician for a while. That's partly due to his, I think, the prominence he had in the pandemic when he was declared to be King of the North while campaigning for more resources for Greater Manchester in local lockdown. So he's a bit of an outlier in terms of someone who's not, you know, a member of the cabinet or a party leader. So he's got quite high name recognition going to this already, and started with, for a major British politician, a pretty strong approval rating, in that it's not deeply negative. I think that's, you know, the best thing you could say about it. His average score is about negative net 6 in the polls, which compared to most other party leaders is pretty good.
Yes, well, if we do some comparisons, according to YouGov, a month before taking office, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak had a net favourability of minus 35. Boris Johnson was on minus 23, Starmer on minus 20. I mean, we know how quickly that plummeted for Keir Starmer, but actually, for all bar one of those politicians I've just mentioned, a year in, their net favourability really sunk. Boris Johnson is the outlier there, another former mayor. He, amazingly, despite sort of the very chaotic events of his time in office, his approval rating actually improved after a year. How can Andy Burnham do the same?
I mean, the Boris Johnson secret that you would have for improving your approval ratings after a year would be another pandemic. That's what was driving up Boris Johnson's approval ratings, was we were all trapped at home wondering what was going to happen next. And there was a rally around the flag effect in the polling, and people were drawn to the Conservative Party. And so, you know, that would be the kind of event that you would look to normally, at the moment, it seems, to drive his approval ratings up. Beyond that, delivering kind of meaningful change in voters' lives, which they keep saying they want to see and they keep saying they don't feel like they're seeing, would be the next best thing. But the other problem he's got is, with such a fragmented electorate, what some people are looking for might very well alienate other groups of voters. So it's a very difficult balancing act. Yeah,
on Monday, he's going to say he wants to make tangible change to people's lives as soon as possible. And he said, look, I'm prepared to take on problems previously have been considered basically too politically challenging to tackle and to solve. I think that there's a kind of, I don't know what the right word is. When you hear, oh, I'm going to change things, there's maybe fatigue from the general population who hear, well, the Labour Party have promised that over the last 2 years, and what materially has changed? Does he need a new message, do you think, or does promising change work this time around with a very different personality making the promises?
I think a different personality can go some way to changing that. How voters perceive you as an individual, how voters perceive you as a politician can be an important part of that. But frankly, a lot of it comes down to delivery. There's reporting, like you say, this morning about a policy blitz when he comes in, about some big announcements. We do know that cost of living inflation is one of voters' top 3 concerns, has been for a while, along with the economy more broadly. So some immediate action on that might be enough to give them a further initial boost. We've seen evidence in the polls that since it became clear that Andy Burnham was going to be the next leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister, there's been a bit of an uplift for Labour in the polls. So this might build on that momentum. But we really won't know until he's in there and the announcements started coming out. This is a very tight-lipped, leak-proof operation. So we don't really have a clear idea of who the top team are going to be, what the key announcements are. And we may well not do it until he's standing in front of Downing Street on Monday.
Yeah, and credit to his team for managing to keep things so close-knit as well. Thank you, Professor Timothy Oliver, lecturer in British politics and public policy at the University of Manchester.
Can he keep people together? Can he be popular on what seems to be a foundation built on devolution, reindustrialisation and public ownership? Does all of that carry him when it comes to popularity in this way? Andy Burnham is promising to bring voters back the Labour they once knew. And I'm just intrigued to try to determine what you think he means by that. What is the Labour that voters once knew that he wants to bring back?
It's a really interesting question. The speech yesterday was really resplendent with historical analogies and this very sort of clear invocation of a sort of politics that predates the 1980s, right? An idea that we might turn the tide of history and return Labour to something that maybe predates neoliberalism. So he was very, very clear on wanting to be kind of non-factional, wanting to be a Labour leader of a Labour that represented kind of different factions, different moments in the party. But I think he was also trying to, in lots of ways, invoke something that was kind of pre-New Labour. I think in his challenge to where the direction of the party so far, he was suggesting that he wanted to invoke a kind of embrace of local government and a rejection of the privatization agenda that has been accepted by Labour leaders for decades, and to really invoke something that kind of goes back to the pre-New Labour era.
In terms of what he has said then on trying to get to sort of pre-New Labour, should we consider the context that he is inheriting when it comes to the economy, to immigration, and to whether this period in time in which he is becoming Prime Minister is reminiscent of the time he is trying to get back to, i.e., can he sort of transplant that era to this one?
That's an interesting question. So no, in lots of ways, no, I don't think he can. I don't think that we are looking at anything like the 1980s or the 1990s. In terms of migration, we're looking at a totally different context. In terms of the fragmentation of the party system, we're looking at a totally different context. So in lots of ways, no, I don't really think that's quite the right way to look at it. I thought it was really telling, the political leaders that he sought to kind of bring on board and highlight during his speech yesterday. So giving big shout outs to Kinnock, to David Blunkett and to Margaret Beckett. And all of those figures represent is the party sort of prior to, they're figures who transcend the party in the 1980s, 1990s, who hold positions of influence throughout. In Blunkett's case, there's a real strength in local government there. That he brings in, of course, to important cabinet positions. So the context, I think, is in many ways different. I don't think that this is a kind of moment of economic breakdown in the way that we might think of the 1980s as being, or the 1970s as being, sorry. I think that the context is quite different. In many ways, I think Burnham is inheriting a more favorable context than some of his Labour predecessors. But he is actually, but at the same time, he is inheriting a more challenging political context due to the sort of fragmentation of the party system and the way in which Labour has more challengers on many different sides.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. What then of the precedent of his becoming leader and indeed Prime Minister in a couple of days' time in this way? It's been relatively plain sailing. He was only elected as an MP about a month ago. In fact, yes, we were reporting on that a month ago. The election was a month ago today in Makerfield. The precedent of all of this I'm just so intrigued as to how smooth actually it seems to have been for somebody who has wanted this role for a long time. I accept that, but in terms of the actual execution of it, it's quite remarkable.
Yeah, it's totally unprecedented in my opinion. Not to say that it's in any way unprecedented for leaders, for prime ministers to come in mid-term. The Conservative Party, of course, has an incredibly auspicious record in this respect. You can name your prominent Conservative prime minister. Winston Churchill, John Major, they all came in mid-term and went on to successful periods of leadership. But for Labour, it's distinctive. I mean, we've had two Labour prime ministers, of course, Gordon Brown and Jim Callaghan, who have come in mid-term. But I think in both circumstances, things look different, right? So for Brown, there was a long period of challenge to Blair, right, where he picks up and ultimately comes into power towards the end of New Labour's sort of tenure. And Callaghan, Wilson steps down. So it's a different context entirely. And I think that this example of someone who has sort of gone away, established themselves in a position of power as a mayor, right, and then swooped back into Parliament like this is a little bit unprecedented. So there's, of course, lots of Labour figures like Ken Livingstone and Herbert Morrison who have established themselves in municipal government, but they haven't come in and returned to power and become prime minister in the way that we're looking at with Burnham. So I do think that this is kind of unusual, actually, and in some ways unprecedented. And it's going to be a real test for Burnham whether he can, take the skills and the appeal that he has had as a mayor and translate them into a successful premiership.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that, I think, Lise, to sort of try to tie together some of the themes we've been pulling at here, is that based on his speech yesterday, and I think right at the start of his speech actually, he was talking about people and their perception of Labour, that it's perhaps turned into something different to what they knew. And I note that Luke Trill, Executive Director of More in Common, the polling organisation who runs focus groups relentlessly across the country, he says that chimes with what we hear in focus groups a lot. Phrases like, Labour isn't the party for working people anymore. Those phrases come up a lot. I suppose what's interesting, based on what you're saying there, transplanting that era to this one may not work. And actually, people's perceptions of the Labour Party, are they outdated? Are they a thing of the past? And do they need to evolve at this time of Andy Burnham?
It's really interesting. Labour is constantly changing its electoral base, right? The idea of what the working class is, the working class that Labour is supposed to represent, is constantly evolving. Do I think that it's going to be successful to kind of take a old-fashioned nostalgic idea of Britain's working class and seek to transplant that to 2026? Do I think that's going to work? No, I don't. Do I think it's possible that a new political strategy, one that Burnham is advocating, which is using a more sort of active, more interventionist, and ultimately more local variant of the state to try and impact people in a concrete way and help them show what the state can do? Do I think that has the capacity to build new coalitions? Yeah, I think maybe it does. So, it's a different context, but I'm not totally pessimistic about it.
It's really interesting. Lise, it's great to speak to you this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your time.